Some breaking news here to report. We are learning now, in fact, just learning a few moments ago, Michael Cohen has now been subpoenaed by the Senate Intelligence Committee to testify. Senate Intel just a few moments ago telling our Hallie Jackson, confirming with our Chief White House correspondent Hallie Jackson that he is in fact going to be subpoenaed. You'll recall here, just a few moments ago, we played you that sound from Cohen's attorney, Lanny Davis, who appeared this morning over on Good Morning America. This is what Lanny Davis said about why Michael Cohen would not be testifying before the House committee.
The last thing that Michael Cohen fears are partisan hack questions from Republicans. We expect that. Let me be very clear. The House of Representatives now has an obligation. A resolution of censure when the President of the United States indisputably intimidates and obstructs justice to prevent a witness from testifying is an order.
Lanny Davis there, Michael Cohen's legal advisor, again, reiterating what we heard yesterday from Michael Cohen, that he would not be testifying before that House committee, citing threats to his family from the president and the president's TV attorney, Rudy Giuliani. President Trump yesterday also tweeting about this news, tweeting about Cohen's decision to no longer testify. This was the president's tweet related to his one-time attorney and fixer, Michael Cohen. President Trump tweeting, I believe we have the tweet. There it is. So interesting that bad lawyer Michael Cohen, who sadly will not be testifying before Congress, is using the lawyer of Crooked Hillary to represent him. Gee, how did that happen? Remember July 4th weekend when Crooked Hillary went before the FBI, blah, blah, blah. Again, that tweet from the president related to Michael Cohen. Now, again, word just a few moments ago that Michael Cohen has been subpoenaed to testify before the Senate Intel Committee. This changes things in a few major ways. Again, remember, Michael Cohen set to report to prison in March. We don't know when he is set to appear before the Senate Intel Committee, but I want to bring in Michael Steele now, former senior advisor to Jeb Bush, former spokesman for House Speaker John Boehner. Jason Johnson also with me, politics editor at TheRoot.com. He's an MSNBC political contributor. I'll start with you, Michael Steele. How big of a deal?
It's a huge deal. I mean, I think it was inevitable that at some point Cohen would appear before Congress. I think that it is important that Senate intelligence is going first. I think it's a good reminder, too, that there are concerns in both parties. Senate intelligence is a bipartisan investigation. They are continuing to look at questions about the president, his campaign, what ties they may have had to Russia, other activities that may have been nefarious. This is not a straight party line issue, and so I'm glad that this bipartisan panel is going to be getting first crack at Cohen. Jason,
President Trump also talked about this yesterday. He was asked by reporters about Michael Cohen, the president saying in part, quote, I would say he's been threatened by the truth. President Trump asserting that's why he wouldn't be appearing before the House committee. President Trump going on to say he's only been threatened by the truth, doesn't want to do that probably for me or other of his clients. He has other clients also, I assume. What do you make of this, Jason?
I mean, look, a bully, a thug, a mobster, and an intimidator is not going to say, I'm putting a gun to your head. They're going to speak in these roundabout ways like the president is speaking. He's afraid of the truth. I hope something doesn't happen. I hope nothing happens to his family's taxes. These are the kinds of things that Donald Trump has said throughout his career, because these are the kinds of things that Michael Cohen has said on Donald Trump's behalf throughout his career. Craig, I never thought there was going to be any question of whether or not Michael Cohen was going to testify. The only thing I was wondering about is whether or not it's going to be public and what parts of it are going to be public, because we knew that there was no chance that he was not going to testify in front of Congress.
The two gentlemen who run the Intel Committee, Chairman Richard Burr, Vice Chairman Mark Warner, they don't typically comment on who they are subpoenaing. But this is what Burr told us last Wednesday when asked if it's fair to say that you are preparing to subpoena Michael Cohen. Senator Burr, what I would expect the next step to be is if he didn't voluntarily respond to our letter. How close are you to doing that was the question. I don't think I'm ready to wrap up, but I've got a lot of things to do before then. And then Senator Burr goes on to say it would probably be helpful to hear from Cohen before he goes to jail. I find it very difficult to interview people in jail. Again, Cohen expected to report for a 3-year prison sentence in March. Michael Steele, can he cite concerns about his family's safety? Can he cite those again as reason to not appear before the Senate Intel Committee?
he can cite whatever he wants, but he's now facing a subpoena. He's going to have to appear, whether publicly or privately, whatever conditions Senator Burr and Senator Warner set, he will have to come and give testimony before that congressional committee.
And again, there is a possibility that he will testify in a closed-door session, correct?
Right. I think that's definitely possible, and that may be the right way to go, considering there's overlapping jurisdictions here, and some of the things they may want to hear about have also been topics of the Mueller investigation or other investigations. Right. So we're going to have to see the best way to proceed, but it looks as though having the bipartisan investigation hear from him in the Senate is going to be a big step forward for them.
Jason Johnson, if you were on that Senate Intel Committee, what would you ask Michael Cohen?
Well, I would ask Michael Cohen primarily about business dealings that he has with President Trump in the state of New York and up and down the East Coast. Because ultimately, what we have to remember is whether or not the Mueller report becomes public, whenever that comes about, we don't know whether the Attorney General is going to actually release all that information. The reality is there are other potential crimes or crimes that Michael Cohen has alluded to that the president has been involved in. And the Democrats, if they're smart, want to make sure that, like, look, we're going to investigate every single aspect of this presidency that may be corrupt and may potentially be impeachable. So you ask Cohen about this dirty deal. You ask Cohen about bags of money. You ask Cohen about, you know, this payoff and that payoff, et cetera, because there will be a series of investigations that need to happen no matter what the final result is of the Mueller investigation.
All right, again, word just a few moments ago that the Senate Intelligence Committee has now issued a subpoena to Michael Cohen, President Trump's one-time personal attorney and fixer, to testify in mid-February. Mid-February, we're being told, is when Mr. Cohen would be compelled to testify. Michael Steele, you've been around those halls of Congress for a long time. When witnesses refuse the subpoena, what happens?
Well, if ultimately they can be held in contempt of Congress. I realize Mr. Cohen is headed to prison already, but he could ultimately face incarceration if he defies the subpoena. Most people, generally speaking, don't defy the subpoena. And again, particularly if they allow him to testify privately, I would think that would address many, if not all, of the concerns that he's cited thus far.
We are right now reaching out to Mr. Cohen, to attorneys who either represent him or in the past have represented him as well, to get their reaction. Will he comply with the subpoena? We are efforting a response right now. Kristen Welker standing by for us as well at the White House. Kristen, have we heard from the administration with regards to this latest news?
We haven't yet, Craig, but of course, President Trump was asked about this yesterday and about those concerns that his former attorney and personal fixer has conveyed to friends, concerns about his family's safety. And the question was put to President Trump, does he feel as though he's been threatening in some of those public comments that he has made about Michael Cohen, about his stepfather, about family members? The president essentially saying no, the only thing he's been threatened by is the truth. So the president really sort of laying down the gauntlet there. Now, of course, President Trump at one point standing very firmly behind his former fixer. But once it became clear that he was going to cooperate with federal authorities, the president's tone shifted dramatically. And so we really have seen this ratcheting up of attacks from the president verbally and online on Twitter, and also from his attorney, Rudy Giuliani, who was out over the weekend questioning Michael Cohen and some of his family members as well. So we're trying to get some response from the administration, from Michael Cohen's legal team. But again, yet another significant development and twist in this ongoing situation swirling around the president's former attorney, Craig.
Do we know, Kristen, whether the subpoena was, do we know whether the impetus was the announcement yesterday, or do we surmise that the Senate Intel Committee was planning to do this all along?
I think that is a fair assessment. And remember, after Michael Cohen's attorney, Lanny Davis, had announced that he wanted to postpone his planned testimony before the House Intelligence Committee, which was supposed to take place, House Oversight Committee, I should say, which was supposed to take place over the next 2 weeks, you heard lawmakers start to talk about the possibility of subpoenaing him and making it very clear that, look, even once he goes to prison, which is going to happen in early March, Congress still has the authority to essentially secure his testimony. They made it very clear they wanted to work with him. They had concerns about the safety of his family as well, based on what he was saying, but that not testifying was not an option, Craig. That was very clear based on the response that we got yesterday from the Oversight and Intelligence Committees, Craig.
Hey, Michael Steele, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Senate Intel Committee, it does a fair amount of its work behind closed doors. Is that right?
It does. I mean, I think for your viewers, it would be wonderful to be able to see this in public. But one of the reasons that this committee has been able to do its work in a bipartisan fashion, in a serious fashion, is because much of it is done behind closed doors, out of the public's view.
Jason, politically, how damaging could this testimony be for this president?
Oh, it'd be huge. I mean, Craig, we cannot underestimate how important it is. This is not an issue of Michael Cohen knows where the bodies are buried. Michael Cohen knows where they got the shovels to bury the bodies, right? He knows everything about the president. And like anyone who's been sort of a shifty lawyer for a potentially corrupt boss, he's kept lots of receipts. He's kept lots of documentation. So if this were to be a public hearing, I almost think this would be bigger than anything that Mueller could come up with. But even if it is private, what we're going to hear, what's going to be expressed from the members of the Senate when they come out of the room saying, I heard this, I heard that, hair slicked back, frightened, terrified of the story and the depths of grime and disgust that Cohen has been involved in on behalf of this president. Politically, I can't imagine how bad this is going to be. And if it's public, this will be more riveting than the Kavanaugh hearings last year, and that's a pretty high threshold.
To be clear, Kristen Welker, in terms of characterizing how the president has painted his relationship with Michael Cohen, that has changed over the years. How does he now describe his one-time fixer and personal attorney?
That's such an important part of this, Craig. Remember, Michael Cohen initially said he would take a bullet for President Trump. Well, we have slowly seen President Trump distance himself over the many months that this has been evolving. And he's made comments like, he wasn't my attorney for very long. He didn't handle significant cases. And take that to some of the more recent comments that we've heard from his attorney, Rudy Giuliani, referring to Michael Cohen as a rat. So the dialogue, the tone with which the president and his allies have spoken about Michael Cohen has devolved over time, with the president increasingly trying to distance himself from Cohen. Remember, Craig, one of the things that is at the crux of this, Michael Cohen pleading guilty to lying to members of Congress about the discussions that he had about that Trump Tower Moscow project, one of the central sort of questions swirling around the broader Russia investigation. So when you talk about how damaging the testimony could be from Michael Cohen, certainly it's something that the president and his allies are concerned about. Having said that, though, there's one important caveat here, Craig, which is that based on my conversations with those close to Michael Cohen, it was anticipated that if and when he does talk to members of Congress, that he wouldn't be able to discuss all of the topics in a public setting, Craig.
Why would that be?
Well, in part, some of the information might be deeply held confidential, and so there was a sense that he wouldn't necessarily be able to cover every single topic. So there were real questions swirling around how damaging would his testimony, in fact, be, at least in a public setting. Democrats were sort of eyeing it and thinking it could be a chance to seize upon some of the potential revelations, and it wasn't clear that, for example, he would be able to talk extensively about the Trump Tower Moscow project. But again, there was a question mark about how extensively he'd be able to delve into some of those topics, Craig.
For our viewers and listeners on Sirius Satellite Radio, probably a good time to let you know that Michael Cohen's legal advisor, Lanny Davis, is actually going to join us in just a few minutes. He'll be talking to my colleague Andrea Mitchell coming up here on MSNBC. It was Lanny Davis who just a few hours ago reiterated what we heard yesterday from Michael Cohen, that he would not be testifying before the House Oversight and Reform Committee because of what he described, Lanny Davis described as ongoing threats to Cohen's family from the president and the president's TV lawyer, Rudy Giuliani. Again, Lanny Davis going to join us here to talk about this breaking news in just a moment. Kasie Hunt is also joining us. Kasie Hunt joining us now from Capitol Hill. Kasie, do we know, and again, I know this is news that's just breaking a few moments ago, but do we know whether this subpoena is a direct result of Cohen's decision to not testify before that House committee?
Craig, this has been a long kind of brewing saga with the Senate Intelligence Committee. They have been trying to get Michael Cohen to agree to testify in front of their committee for some time now, and there has been a level of frustration that they haven't been able to square that circle, so to speak. So this, I think, you should read into this from the Capitol Hill perspective. This is a pretty significant and acrimonious step for them to take. It's one that they have been careful to try and avoid. In many other instances, it's been pretty rare that the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Richard Burr, has wanted to take a step like this. And I think it reflects the seriousness with which they take this idea that Cohen had lied to Congress. If you go back to when we first learned about the charges that were being brought against Michael Cohen, you may remember that the realities around what he has admitted to doing really angered a lot of people here in the Congress on both sides of the aisle, and it was taken as a very serious indication that the investigation into the president was reaching a new level. And so I think that's kind of the context in which you should think about their decision to take this rather extraordinary step. And there are some questions, and forgive me, we are just sorting through this as breaking news. But some questions around, whether he has already waived his Fifth Amendment protection rights in a situation like this, because he has talked to some of these committees about what has happened in the course of this Russia investigation. So we're still trying to kind of understand, what Michael Cohen's legal options may be. We know that he wanted to testify in public in front of the House Oversight Committee. I mean, that appearance was set to happen without a subpoena. He was not being compelled. That was something he was looking forward to doing. Obviously, now we've been reporting for the past 24 hours about the fact that his family feels intimidated and other things. So, my main question at this stage is, what is it exactly that the Senate Intelligence Committee wants from Michael Cohen that he's not interested in providing, that he wouldn't have had to perhaps deal with in the context of the oversight investigation? So those are some of the questions that we're going to be pulling on here in the coming hours, Craig. One
more question here really quickly. Does this increase the likelihood that a House committee now also issues a separate subpoena? And I only ask that question because we know the upper chambers controlled by Republicans. One might assume that they would want this to be a closed-door session. Lower chamber controlled by Democrats. One might assume they would want this to be a public hearing. Does this subpoena increase the likelihood that a House committee is now going to issue a subpoena for Michael Cohen as well?
I think we're still a little bit too far in the early stages to tell, Craig. But my instinct would be that, the political interests of Michael Cohen and House Democrats seem to be aligned at the moment because Cohen has turned against the president. So that would indicate that Democrats probably have more of an incentive to work with Michael Cohen's team and not reach this acrimonious stage. We haven't gotten any indications that, talks between them at this point have completely broken down, or that there's anything along those lines jeopardizing his appearing. Now, we do know that Adam Schiff, the House Intelligence Committee chairman, had indicated to Michael Cohen's team over the weekend that he wants him to appear there. That, I think, is an area you might want to keep an eye on in terms of a subpoena or something like this. Do remember, though, the Senate Intelligence Committee, while they've had their share of squabbles from a partisan perspective, they've been much more successful at operating in a bipartisan manner. And I'm interested to know how this subpoena came to be. Typically, we would have expected that in a situation like this, the chairman and the vice chairman would be on board together with issuing these subpoenas, which would suggest there could be some bipartisan interest in this, which again goes back to that idea that But, Congress doesn't like to be lied to. Lying to Congress is typically a bad idea, and that's how we may have ended up here. But again, still in the early stages of reporting out kind of all of these details and nuances, Craig.
Kasie Hunt for us on the Hill. Thank you. Michael Steele, thanks for sticking around. Kristen Welker, big thanks to you. And Jason, thanks for your perspective, too.
Thanks for watching. To see more videos, click right here, and subscribe.